Okay, hi everybody. This is going to be a lesson about analysing bebop lines, specifically a Charlie Parker line.
If you don't do it my way, you will fail at music and you will suck and everybody will laugh at you behind your back.
That's absolutely true. It's in the thumbnails. No, of course not. So this is just a few things that I've thought about and ideas I've had about how to do it over the years and things I've learned. So anyway, here's the Parker line. This one comes from a tune called Celebrity. It was a recording cut with Buddy Rich on drums, and it's basically a big feature for Buddy Rich. What's quite interesting about this one is it's not quite clear what's the head and what's improvised. There's a lot of reused licks and things in it, and it kind of has a feeling like there's a head in and a head out. But when you actually start to look at the notes of the head in detail, it's like they're not the same from one thing to the other. So it's like a little bit more kind of free and open than that. We're going to analyse this in a way that I think a lot of people have learnt to do. And we're going to analyse Bird's note choices over the original progression. So if we do this, we get this set of changes. And if I just comp through them, they actually sound pretty sweet. I mean, it sounds pretty nice. It would make a good comp, right? In my analysis, which I'm just going to bring up, I've put the extensions and things above the notes so you can see my reasoning. And you often get this sort of chord scale analysis based on these extensions. So, for instance,
over the G7 chord, Charlie Parker selects the 13th, the flat 9th and flat 5 extensions that imply the G half-whole diminished scale.
So you see this type of stuff all the time. In fact, I would think of this as the mainstream way to analyse the harmony of jazz lines. And we see what kind of notes are over what chords and how we can understand these using some sort of chord scale analysis or something like that. I don't really like this type of analysis, at least not as a first step. I think that analysis should reflect the way that the players come up with the music, and I don't buy that this is Bird's logic, right? I don't think he was thinking up from the root of the vanilla rhythm changes chords. In fact, Bird was clearly doing his own thing against those vanilla changes. I mean, it's the first thing we learn about jazz, right? It's improvised. There's no score with the harmonies planned out in advance. I mean, it's not like we have a committee meeting every time we play a blues. Everybody knows rhythm changes, and probably everybody knows a slightly different version of the rhythm changes. It follows naturally that jazz is kind of like a music of layers. The harmonies are piled up on top of each other, not part of some theoretical uber chord. I mean, contrast that to something like Debussy, where, you know, the composer writes all the notes. So even you've got some kind of extended structure, some beautiful grand chord, it's all the product of one musician's ears. Whereas in jazz, it's a give and take, you know, there's a negotiation. We're all hearing it in our own way, and we play together by listening to each other. So I know what some of you might be thinking. Didn't Bird say something like, I found that by using the higher intervals of a chord as a melody line and backing them up with appropriately related changes, I could play the thing I'd been hearing. This is a very famous quote. It's frequently quoted with different wording. Maybe Bird didn't actually say this. So the late Conrad Cork, the Harmony with Lego Bricks guy, I don't know if you know that book, but it's an interesting book, although I think sadly it's out of print now. He once tried to track down the original wording and which interview with Bird this famous quote came from, and he could only find it in copy written by a downbeat journalist. So if this is true, generations of jazz musicians, educators and journalists have been kind of putting words in Bird's mouth. This to give you an idea, like this is something that even Dexter Gordon said in Round Midnight. You'd probably find it engraved on a stone tablet at Berkeley somewhere. So maybe Bird didn't say it and it's just a meme. After all, there's plenty of quotes floating around from people who never said them. So anyway, what I'd like to do is take a step back and look at some of the features of this line on its own. So we're going to look at the changes that Parker is implying in the line. This is kind of subjective, here in different ways, but this is what I think they are. At least this is how I hear them. So I'm just going to go through the line and sort of show you what I mean. The first line is this thing, which is kind of like a B flat major 7th thing to me. You know, the prominent notes are these seem to be the prominent notes for a 3rd, the 5th, and the roots, and the 7th. So yeah, maybe B flat major 7th. Or maybe going from B flat to D minor if you like, I don't mind. And then there's a straight B flat triad. And then, so that's just B flat. And then he has a sort of this kind of thing, which is really nice. And it goes on with the chromatic line, so I'll just play it through so you can hear it in context. And that to me sounds like it sounds like a sort of A7 chord going to B flat. It's one of my favourite moves. It might have an augmented fifth, that A7. It might not. It's not specified by the line that F belongs to the B flat chord. And then we've got what's very obviously a D flat minor 7th arpeggio. Classic 2-5-1. So it's like it's like a F C minor arpeggio, C minor 7, going to F7 flat 9. I mean, you could also look at it as an A diminished 7th chord. And then we get this arpeggio again. And then that feels like a I mean, could be. I would tend to think that probably as being D minor 7 flat 5. And then going to. So that's clearly E flat going to E flat minor. And then there's this this sort of line carries on. That kind of thing. So the implication here is we got this sort of progression which goes something like E flat. Then you can listen to that chromatic line in the top of the chords there. I'll come back to that in a minute. So I've put those in red on the chart, and I'm going to put the vanilla changes in blue above, just so you can compare them. Obviously, they're not the same thing. So, I mean, the chords that are in common, B flat, obviously. Related chords, D minor 7 and B flat. There's a C minor 7 in common. And there's an E flat chord in common. But then the rest of it's a little bit different. So check out in bar 3. Here we have what is clearly a D flat minor 7 arpeggio. I mentioned it a second ago. So my thought is that Bird might not have been thinking much about the vanilla G7 when playing this chord. You know, if you put them both together, you get something known as the, it's called the Herbie Hancock substitution, the Herbie substitution. Which is, you know, this sort of fancy half-whole diminished thingamabob. But I don't think he's thinking about it this way. And the reason why I think that is because it's a substitute. And the thing about substitutes is you don't tend to think about the original chord when you're doing a substitute. So if I play, like, for instance, I can give you a 2-5-1 here. But I'm not thinking about G7, even though theoretically I'm playing the alterations on G7. So that's like a mental process thing. Even though you can analyze it that way, and it's not necessarily wrong to do that, the process that I'm going through is I'm playing D flat 7. So this is how the old sort of system of subs worked. So that D flat minor, I mean, it could be a tritone sub, right? So I could go. For instance, it doesn't work quite as well in major. So I think there's actually a simpler explanation. I think the D flat minor 7 is simply a way of getting from D minor 7 to C minor 7. I mean, even guitarists can understand that, right? It's the most basic chromatic voice leading imaginable. It's all in parallel. It's very simple. We're basically just joining up the dots. In jazzland, we call this a side slip, and it's a device that you actually see a lot in bop. For instance, 4 by Miles Davis. You see, so like this. It's an early Beatles tune that does that as well. So it's pretty obvious stuff, right? This is not. I don't think we need to start talking about half whole octatonic doodahs. But some of these chords that I've written out in this sort of Uber chord chart don't really work. So, for instance, in the last bar of it, we've got this E, this prominent E over the C minor, and if you put an E over a C minor, well, there's no common chord scale for that. We tend to avoid putting major thirds, scales of major thirds on minor chords. It's considered to be a bad form, bad move in traditional jazz harmony. I mean, like you can do that, a minor third on a major chord, or even this. But doing this, minor chord with a major third on it. I mean, Ben Monder's probably written a tune on it, but it's not something that's considered commonplace. So it's almost like he's just ignoring the vanilla changes there. I mean, it sounds great anyway. In fact, of course, if we look at the line, not only is it's got a super hip rhythm, 1, 2, back to 1 again. So in terms of what's going on harmonically there, it's just 2 lines really. Or it sounds like Blackbird or something, or Lester Young had ideas like this. They played stuff like that, So these chord symbols are perhaps suggesting there's a little bit more to the harmony than there is. To take seriously the idea of like E flat minor against the E flat 7 chord, for instance, making an E flat 7 sharp 9. I mean, we often see minors on dominance in jazz. Hang on, what does that remind me of? No idea. Anyway, so we can see the whole of that last 3 bars as being a classic, even cliche chromatic voice leading device. Again, Bird is doing his own thing, and getting too hung up on the relationship between the vanilla chords and the line is probably a waste of mental energy. So I would say Bird is mostly using the logic of, here I am playing turnarounds in B flat, here are some B flat turnaround variations and movements through the key I like, rather than thinking about this in a sort of chord by chord fashion. He is, as far as I can see, thinking about it as a thing in B flat that maybe goes to E flat in bar 6. Pretty much how Barry Harris used to teach it, right? So here's my map of how the vanilla changes and Bird's changes relate. The things that relate to the chords are in black, everything else is in red, and we can see them as passing chords. So if we look at it in this way, we get what I think is more logical. Bird is selectively choosing which chords of the original tune he's going to play, and then finding his ways into them however he likes, as you can see from the chords in red. You can use Bird's harmonic template to come out with your own rhythm changes lines. General, you can collect the sort of pet substitution ideas and use them for yourself. It's really fun actually and freeing, and can give you a lot of fresh ideas for your improvisation. There's a lot more to Bird's lines than just boil down chords. I mean, the way the melody is constructed and the rhythm is pretty amazing and interesting in all his stuff. But that's kind of beyond the scope of this video. By the way, I'm not saying this kind of thing is true for all jazz. I think there are some forms of jazz where it is very much based around these kind of extended chords, and Wayne Shorter springs to mind as an example. In general, just for improvisers, the chord scale extended chord things can be great fun to play with and are a great resource. But for analysing like Charlie Parker lines, I found this kind of approach the most helpful. I hope you find this video useful and interesting, and please, if you do, like and subscribe, and leave any snarky comments you might have below as usual. Thanks very much. I'll see you soon.